The University College of the University of Maine system, together with the Maine Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Standards, has formed a partnership to make public information more accessible to Maine's employers. This is Part 5 of Section 3 of Steve Laundrie's lecture.
Under 1904.7b3, OSHA goes into a discussion as to how to count days away. If an employee misses one or more days away from work beyond the day of the work-related incident, then it is automatically recordable regardless of the treatment rendered to that employee. I'll say that again, regardless of the treatment that was rendered to that employee. Of note, the day of the injury or illness does not count. So, for example, if you have an employee who comes in at 7:30 or 8 in the morning and they get injured at 8:05 and miss the rest of the day, that is not, repeat, that is not considered to be a day away. On your OSHA Form 300, you would place a check mark in column H to indicate that the case did result in one or more days away from work beyond the day of the injury, and you would enter the whole number of calendar days away from work in column K. Again, calendar days, not work days, and whole numbers, please. 1, 2, 3, no fractions, no decimals. Following up on that previous question with regards to restricted work, I mentioned OSHA's definition of restricted work, which is under 1904.7b4. And OSHA defines restricted work activity as occurring when either the employee is kept from performing one or more routine functions. Now, I do want all of you to please pause and highlight a couple of items. First off, the employee is actually kept from, meaning they are prohibited from performing that activity, and that the duty regularly performed is an activity they do about once a week. That does not mean 52 times a year. It could be a little bit less. It definitely would be more, but roughly once a week. If an employee is actually kept from performing one or more of those functions, then that is considered to be restricted work. Another way a case could be considered to be restricted work is if an employee is actually kept from working a full work day. Some businesses have a policy of what is known as work hardening, where they have no restrictions on any of their activities, except that then instead of working a full 8 hours, the employee works 6 hours or 7 hours. Every day that employee, every calendar day that employee is working less than their full shift is one whole day of restricted work activity. And finally, if a provider recommends either of the above, regardless of whether the employee follows those restrictions or not, then it is automatically considered to be restricted work. But please remember that last note. Provider recommended modified duty on your M1 or whatever form may not necessarily be restricted work. Again, may not necessarily be restricted work. I will give an example on the next slide. It has been our experience over the years that many employers may tend to over-record on restricted work. Please be aware that OSHA defines restricted work does not mean that for restricted work, that does not mean a limitation on productivity. For example, on this slide, you will see that the employee suffers a work-related injury to her right hand. The employee is unable to use her right hand at work, but still able to operate her machine with her left hand, but at a slower pace than usual, reducing her productivity. In that situation, that in and of itself is not considered to be a restricted work case, but it still might be an other recordable case, which I will discuss at a later slide, falling under column J.
I have a question. I have an M1 from a physician indicating modified duty. Should that be counted as a restricted case?
Again, it depends on what the specific modification or restriction that the provider recommends. If it is just in general terms like work light or work easy, you'll need to get a little more specific information from the provider. In general, when there is a restricted case where there is some sort of limitation to one of their routine functions, we see over the years that being a lifting type of situation. An employee ordinarily lifts 25 pounds or more, and they're limited to 10 pounds. Every day that they're limited to that 10-pound limit is considered to be a restricted workday. Besides cases where an employee is actually kept from working a full workday, one other category that falls under the same column, column L, are cases involving job transfer. You are required to record a case if the injured or ill employee is assigned to a job other than his or her regular job for at least part of the day. For example, if you have a construction firm and the construction worker works part of his day filing or doing data entry, as on this slide, then that would be considered one whole day of job transfer and must be recorded. Please get out your OSHA Form 300. If you do have a case resulting in job transfer or restriction only with no days away from work, then you would enter a check mark in column I, a case with job transfer or restriction. On your OSHA log, I would ask all of you under column I where it says job transfer or restriction to add the word only. Again, column I are for cases that result in job transfer or restrictions only with no days away from work. It is a common error that people put check marks in both H and I, but again, column I are cases resulting in job transfer restriction with no days away. You do not count the day of the injury or illness. Be sure to enter the whole number of calendar days that are restricted or transferred in column L. Whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, no fractures, and no decimals. And very important, if a job transfer or restriction is made permanent, you may stop the count at the point as detailed under 1904.7b4. As I mentioned earlier, one of the more common mistakes that we see in OSHA record keeping is employees putting check marks in both columns H and I. Please be aware that if you have a case that results in both days away and days of job transfer or restriction, you have only one case. You put a check mark in column H, and please leave columns I and J blank. You will see above columns G through J, check only one, the most severe outcome. In a situation where there's one or more days away from work, regardless of the number of days of job transfer, you would put a check mark in column H and leave columns I and J blank. You would enter the number of days away, calendar days away, in column K, and then you would enter the number of calendar days of job transfer and restriction in column L. You do not count the day of the incident, and then you would enter one and only one check mark in one of the subcolumns of column M. Okay. Inside, as part of your package, you should have a set of forms with the title OSHA Forms for Recording Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses. And on the third page is a description of what is considered to be an injury and what is considered to be an illness. You will see this with the title Classifying Injuries. Please bear with me, folks, on going through this. An injury in general is an instantaneous event, such as a cut, a puncture, a laceration, a fracture, a bruise. All of those are considered to be injuries. The general rule is a snap of the finger. If it takes longer than a snap of a finger to get this to have this problem, have this incident, then is considered to be an illness. This, if you do have an injury, you are required to put a check mark in column M1. If, however, the incident is an illness, it would fall under one of the next 5 columns, columns M2 through M6. Column M2 are skin diseases or disorders, such as dermatitis, eczema, rashes. All of those would fall under skin diseases and disorders, and you must put a check mark in column M2 if that's the situation. Respiratory conditions include the following: silicosis, asbestosis, pharyngitis, rhinitis, tuberculosis. These are all considered to be respiratory conditions. If the incident falls under any of these, then you must put a check mark in column M3. Column M4 are for poisonings, such as poisoning by lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, or other metals. Also includes insecticide sprays. Any situation like that, any type of poisoning, you are required to put a check mark in column M4. Column M5 are hearing loss cases. I will be going into detail on hearing loss cases. Just wanted to point this out. If you do have a recordable hearing loss case, you must put a check mark in column M5. And then the broadest category are all other illnesses. As you can see, it falls from heat stroke, sunstroke. Welder's flash is considered to be an other illness. Mental illness is considered to be an other illness. Blood-borne cases such as HIV or hepatitis are considered to be other illnesses also. Also, I would ask all of you to please write down here on your own tendinitis and carpal tunnel. Tendinitis and carpal tunnel develop over a period of time, therefore they're considered to be illnesses.